You know, for almost 500 years, the Roman Republic was the superpower of the ancient world. It felt indestructible, a masterpiece of law, military power, and engineering, a system that was built to last. But then, in less than a century, it completely tore itself apart. So today, we're going to dig into how this giant collapsed into chaos, civil war, and finally into a dictatorship. Okay, let's get into it.
Way back in 59 BC, Rome's most famous politician and speaker, Cicero, wrote this to his best friend. Talk about despairing, right? He saw the writing on the wall. He knew the Republic was dying. But the real question is, what was the murder weapon?
So is it ambitious generals with their ultra-loyal legions who literally ripped the state apart? Or was the whole system already so rotten, so eaten through with bribes and gridlock that it was just doomed to fall in on itself? That's the big question we're tackling.
To really get why it all fell apart, first we have to understand what the Republic was supposed to be, and, more importantly, where the cracks in its foundation were already starting to show.
The whole idea behind the Republic was summed up in its motto, SPQR, the Senate and the People of Rome. The entire government was structured to prevent one person, a king, from ever taking total control again. You had the Senate, all the elites, controlling the money and foreign policy. Then you had the people, who elected the officials and passed the laws. On paper, it's a pretty sweet balance.
But let's be honest, that shared power thing was mostly an illusion. In reality, a tiny elite, we're talking maybe 5% of the population, held almost all the wealth and all the real political power. This massive, gaping inequality created a powder keg of social tension just waiting for a spark.
And that spark finally came in 133 BC. This is the moment, right here, when the unwritten rules of Roman politics were just shattered, and a new, deadly tool entered the arena: murder.
So, you get these two brothers, the Gracchi. They actually try to tackle that huge inequality problem, proposing reforms to give land back to the poor. Well, the Senate elites saw this as a direct attack on their power, and instead of debating them, they responded with clubs. For the very first time, a political argument was settled by beating a politician to death in the streets of Rome.
And this is absolutely crucial to understand. The murder of the Gracchi was like the Republic's original sin. It set a horrible new precedent. If you can't win the vote, you can just kill your opponent. The genie of political violence was officially out of the bottle, and there was no putting it back in.
So, politics now has this new, brutal weapon. But what happens when you give that weapon to ambitious generals who command their own private armies? Well, the consequences were, to put it mildly, catastrophic.
Okay, you have to get this fundamental shift. The old Roman army was made of citizen landowners loyal to the state. But then a general named Gaius Marius totally flipped the script. He started recruiting the landless poor, promising them a salary and land when they retired. The result? He created professional armies whose loyalty wasn't to Rome, but to the general who signed their paychecks. And this quote from the historian Plutarch just nails the shock of what happened next. When Marius's rival, a guy named Sulla, had his command taken away by his enemies in Rome, he didn't just write an angry letter. He turned his loyal army around and marched on his own city. It was unthinkable, a total sacrilege. The personal army had just become a weapon against the Republic itself.
And once Sulla took over, it got even worse. He invented the prescriptions, which were basically state-approved hit lists. More than 1,700 of Rome's wealthiest citizens were hunted down and killed, their property stolen. Political violence had just escalated from a street brawl to industrialized mass murder.
But hang on, was it really all about military might? Or was the political system itself so broken, so corrupt, that it was just begging for someone to take over? Let's look at that other side of the argument, the rot from within. And nothing shows this better than the so-called First Triumvirate. It's like a recipe for how to break a republic. You had three guys, Pompey, Crassus, and Caesar, who realized that together they were more powerful than the state itself. They made a private deal to get whatever they wanted, completely bypassing the Senate. Individuals had become more powerful than the institutions.
And this corruption wasn't just in the halls of power. Nope, it spilled right out onto the streets. Politicians started running their own violent gangs to intimidate voters and beat up their rivals. Cicero's letters from this time paint this terrifying picture of a city where law and order had just completely collapsed into mob rule.
So, let's just recap the toxic cocktail we've got brewing. You have a tradition of political violence, you've got generals with private armies, and a government totally paralyzed by corruption. You mix all of that together, and you get an explosion, a full-blown civil war that's about to burn the Republic to the ground.
That private deal between the three strongmen was always fragile. Once Crassus was killed in battle, you were left with two alpha dogs in the same yard, Caesar and Pompey. The Senate, fearing Caesar's popularity, sided with Pompey and ordered Caesar to give up his army. He basically had two choices: obey and face his enemies defenseless, or march on Rome and take it all. He crossed the Rubicon.
And man, Cicero's words here just capture the tragedy of it all. For someone who actually believed in the Republic, there were no good guys left. Both Caesar and Pompey stood for the rule of a single powerful warlord over the state. It didn't matter who won the war, the Republic had already lost.
The Civil War wasn't the final chapter. It was just the beginning of the end. The final death throes of the Republic would be violent, chaotic, and would lead to the one thing the Romans had feared and fought against for centuries: a king.
After crushing all his rivals, Julius Caesar had himself declared dictator for life. I mean, this was a complete betrayal of every Roman ideal. All the power that was supposed to be shared and temporary was now in the hands of one man, forever.
So, a group of senators decided to save the Republic the only way they knew how anymore: with violence. They murdered Caesar on the Ides of March. But as Cicero basically said, killing the tyrant didn't kill tyranny. The system was too far gone. All the assassination did was create a power vacuum, and that kicked off another, even bloodier civil war.
What came next was just a horrifying downward spiral. A new triumvirate hunted down and murdered thousands of their opponents, including Cicero himself. After they defeated Caesar's assassins, they turned on each other until only one man was left standing: Caesar's young heir, Octavian. He would soon take a new name: Augustus, the first Roman emperor.
So what's the bottom line here? It wasn't just the violence, and it wasn't just the corruption. It was this absolutely vicious cycle. The systemic rot and gridlock made people desperate for strong leaders to fix things. Those strong leaders then used their military power to smash through the broken system, and in doing so, they destroyed what was left of it.
Which leaves us with one last really tough question to think about. We always talk about the fall of the Republic as this great tragedy. But for the millions of poor, powerless people living under it, was this system of elite rule and constant dysfunction even worth saving? Was its collapse a terrible accident, or just the inevitable end for something that was already broken beyond repair?